Somewhere in 9th century China, a group of alchemists were not trying to build a weapon, they were trying to live forever. For centuries, Taoist alchemists had been mixing minerals, metals, and organic compounds, searching for an elixir of immortality, something that could stop aging, cure sickness, or grant eternal life to an emperor terrified of death. Instead, in one of history's strangest twists, they stumbled onto a formula that could kill a man in an instant. They mixed sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter, and what they created didn't heal anyone, it exploded. This is the story of how gunpowder, and eventually the gun, was born not from a desire for war, but from a desire to escape death entirely. And understanding how that happened tells us something deeper about the human mind, how our greatest inventions often come from our deepest fears, and how the line between medicine and weapon has always been thinner than we like to admit. To understand why Chinese alchemists were mixing these particular ingredients, you have to understand what they were actually looking for. Immortality was not a fringe obsession. Emperors funded entire workshops devoted to it. Alchemists experimented with mercury, arsenic, sulfur, and mineral compounds, believing that the right combination could purify the body or grant it eternal life. Some of these experiments were disastrous in their own right. Several Chinese emperors are believed to have died from mercury poisoning, ironically while trying to extend their lives. Death, it seems, kept finding its way into the search for its opposite. Sulfur and saltpeter, or potassium nitrate, were common substances in these alchemical workshops. Saltpeter occurs naturally and was already used in traditional medicine and food preservation. Sulfur had long been associated with purification and transformation. When combined with charcoal, something happened that no one intended. The mixture was unstable. It burned violently, sometimes producing sparks, smoke, and small explosions. Early Chinese texts, including a 9th century military and alchemical manuscript, actually warned alchemists against this combination, describing cases where workshops caught fire and alchemists were burned. What we do know is that by this point, the Chinese had discovered a substance that behaved unlike anything else they had worked with. It didn't heal, it ignited. At first, this discovery wasn't seen as useful for war. It was strange, dangerous, and unpredictable, closer to a warning than a breakthrough. But over the following 2 centuries, something shifted. Chinese engineers and military strategists began to realize that a substance capable of violent combustion could be controlled, shaped, and directed. This is where human psychology becomes just as important as the chemistry. Once people understood that this powder could destroy, the question was no longer how do we avoid this, but how do we use this? The earliest weaponized versions were not guns in the way we imagine them today. They were fire arrows, primitive grenades, and eventually a weapon called the fire lance, a spear with a tube attached that could shoot flame, sparks, and shrapnel at an enemy. It was crude, short-range, and often as dangerous to the user as to the target. But it worked psychologically even before it worked mechanically. Enemy soldiers who had never seen fire and noise erupt from a handheld weapon were often more frightened by the shock of it than by its actual killing power. Historians studying early Chinese warfare have noted that gunpowder weapons were sometimes used more for their terrifying sound and light than their lethality. This is an important psychological insight, and it says something that goes far beyond medieval China. Humans are deeply wired to fear the unknown, especially sudden, loud, unexplainable events. A flash of fire, a deafening noise, a weapon that seemed to summon lightning. This triggered something ancient in the human brain, a fear response shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of survival instinct. Long before anyone understood chemistry, humans understood one thing intuitively. Uncontrolled fire and unexpected explosions meant danger. The fire lance exploited that instinct perfectly, weaponizing not just chemistry but human psychology itself. Over the next few centuries, the fire lance evolved. Engineers began experimenting with metal tubes instead of bamboo, which could contain the explosive force more effectively and direct it with greater precision. This gradual evolution eventually led to what historians consider the first true hand cannons, appearing in China by the 13th century and spreading along trade routes to the Middle East and Europe not long after. Each version was refined by trial, failure, and often devastating accidents. Early gun users lost hands, faces, and lives testing new designs. But each failure taught something, and each success spread the knowledge further. What began as a spiritual accident became a slow, deliberate arms race driven by curiosity, ambition, fear, and the very human desire to gain power over others. It's worth pausing here to notice the deeper pattern. The invention of the gun was never really about metal or powder. It was about the human mind's relationship with control. Ancient people were surrounded by forces they couldn't master: disease, death, famine, unpredictable weather, unseen enemies. The search for immortality was itself a search for control over the ultimate uncontrollable force: death. When alchemists accidentally created something explosive, they were, in a strange way, still chasing power over life and death, just from the opposite direction. Instead of preventing death, they had created a tool that could deliver it instantly, from a distance, without the need for physical strength or skill in close combat. This shift changed warfare, but it also changed the psychology of conflict itself. Before gunpowder weapons, killing typically required proximity: a sword, a spear, physical strength, and often direct eye contact with the person you were fighting. Early firearms began to change that relationship, allowing death to be delivered from a distance, with less physical effort, and, for many soldiers, a very different emotional experience. Historians and psychologists studying the evolution of warfare have suggested that this distancing effect gradually altered how humans process the morality and emotional weight of killing. What makes this story so striking isn't just the invention itself, but the irony behind it. Some of the most transformative and dangerous technologies in human history were not born from a desire to destroy, but from a desire to preserve life, to understand nature, or to solve a completely unrelated problem. The atomic age would later echo this same pattern, born from theoretical physics rather than a search for weapons. But centuries earlier, in a quiet Chinese alchemy workshop, the same principle was already at work. Humans searching for eternal life instead uncovered one of the most efficient tools ever created for ending it. This is in many ways a mirror for how human innovation often works. We rarely set out to create the things that change the world forever. We stumble into them while chasing something else entirely: safety, understanding, survival, or in this case, immortality. The gunpowder that emerged from those failed elixirs did not just change the battlefield. It changed the trajectory of human history, reshaping empires, ending old military traditions, and creating new fears that still exist today. Perhaps the most human part of this story isn't the explosion itself, but what came after it. Faced with something powerful and uncontrollable, ancient people didn't destroy the formula or walk away from it. They studied it, refined it, and eventually built it into something intentional. That instinct to take an accident and shape it into a tool may be one of the oldest and most defining traits of the human mind. We are a species that turns chaos into control, danger into design, and even our failures into the foundations of the future.